All right, stock's still racing ahead on indications right now. A lot of this, this very hour, by these clips we've been showing you from our chat with the Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on how to go about getting everything the administration wants to get done, including what could be upwards of $1 trillion infrastructure spending package, big increase in military spending, and oh yeah, multi-trillion-dollar tax cut across the board. That it's going to get done. The Wall Street buying and maybe asking questions or getting into details later, but there is no doubt that at the very least this is going to compound the near-term deficit worries and the total debt worries, a subject I brought up with the Treasury Secretary, who says he is not at all worried. Take a look. The Secretary, let me switch gears a little bit to talk about how the President will address the bigger issue of our debt. He talked about it, it's joking out that essentially it doubled under Barack Obama. You mentioned it yourself, but there didn't seem to be anything grand or sweeping that would warrant or at least get us on a path to getting under control. David Stockman, Ronald Reagan's former budget director, was with me yesterday, Secretary, and he was saying, what worries me about the Trump plan is that he doesn't have one for debt, that we're facing a debt crisis. He says it's going to blow up this summer. But what do you think?
Well, I don't think that's at all reasonable. First of all, nothing's going to blow up this summer, okay? There are obviously longer-term issues on the debt, and the President has talked about this. He's talked about the size of the debt and how it's doubled under the last administration, under Obama, and this is something he's very concerned about. The number one thing that the President and I are focused on is economic growth. We need to create sustainable economic growth in this country, and that means we need to get back to 3% or higher GDP. We can only grow our way out of this situation.
Can you grow your way out of $20 trillion of debt?
Well, you can't grow your way out of 20 down to zero. But again, if you look at the last time we paid down the debt under Clinton, they were surprised when they were running the surpluses. Because again, the compounding impact of growth leads to a lot of revenues.
We had an internet boom then, to be fair. But you're right, growth was growth.
All I'm saying is the first issue we need to start with are economic policies that create growth. And the President is committed that regulatory relief, tax relief, getting rid of Obamacare, these are the types of things that are going to start us back on economic growth.
But not entitlements. You wouldn't at this stage be looking at Social Security or Medicare.
As I said before, we are not looking at that now. That is not part of the agenda.
You said now. Does that mean next year?
Again, I'm not going to comment on what happens in the future one way or another. We're focused on what we're doing now, and that's not part of the plan. The plan is to create economic growth. That's the focus, and we're going to get this done. This is a president who has an agenda and knows how to get things done.
But how do you get it done, Secretary, when 70% of this budget is sort of locked into these programs? And some don't even like calling them entitlements because a lot of people pay into them and say, I don't look at this as a benny or a gift. Having said that, if you don't touch it or it grows on its own, exponentially it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the debt would get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? You have to eventually address it, right?
Well, we need to deal with the things that we can control. And what we can control are the parts of the government where we can control spending. And that means we're going to increase military spending and fund it with areas of the government we can cut back. That's the number one theme. The number two theme is we are going to create economic growth. That's what creates revenues. That's what creates opportunities. That's what creates jobs. That's what creates American profits that can fund infrastructure and other programs. And that's what we're focused on. The agenda for the next 6 months is to pass a change to Obamacare, that repeal and replace it, focus on tax reform, eliminate regulations. So the President signed an executive order, which I'm busy working on in the Treasury. We've got a big team of people working on this. We're looking at regulation. We're going out to every single part, all the regulators. We're going out to people externally. We're going out to banks. I think you've heard me talk about before, we need to make sure that community banks can thrive, that we can have community banks and regional banks and they're not struggled by regulation, that we have tons and tons of liquidity sitting on banks' balance sheets that needs to be put to work to make loans, to create opportunities, and drive American business. So we got a big agenda here. There's lots of work going on, and we're going to create growth.
You know, Secretary, obviously the markets think you will achieve this, and they've had an enormous run-up, almost $3 trillion in market wealth added since the president's election. Many say they're priced for perfection, that they're factoring in everything goes exactly right. I know you don't look day by day or tick market movements, but does the heady advance ever give you pause or make you think, you know, wait a minute, this is still a big task here?
Well, you know, I've been involved in the financial markets for over 30 years, and there's two things I'm 100% convinced of. Markets are not efficient, and you can never predict these things day to day. What's important here is that the market is showing you that people believe in the president's agenda. And that's what's important. And whether the market goes up or down in any given day or in any given week, I've given up following that.
But what do you make of that run-up, a 13% plus run-up just since November? Nearly 4% run-up in the month of February. What do you think of that?
I think it's a huge vote of confidence in this president. I think you couldn't see a stronger indicator of people liking the president's economic policies, the president's political policies, and a vote of confidence in the president.
Interest rates have been remarkably holding steady. Some have expressed surprise they haven't risen more. There's a split interpretation of that, Secretary, that says, well, maybe the bond market isn't convinced that the stock market's right, that the growth might be there, but it might be tame. Fears of big interest rate increases might not pan out, and that it won't markedly change the kind of sluggish recovery we've been seeing. What do you make of that?
Well, as you know, there's a tradition of Fed independence, and I'm going to respect that. I will tell you, I had a terrific meeting with Janet Yellen yesterday. I look forward to working with her. There's a tradition that we get together every week. We spoke for over an hour yesterday. We covered a lot of topics. We got a lot of work to do together. I left the meeting being incredibly comfortable in how we can work together and what she's doing over at the Fed, and I look forward to continuing those conversations with her.
All right, now she can control short-term interest rates, and obviously markets take cues from her, but on interest rates in general and what they've been doing, does any of that surprise you, that rates have been relatively stable? What do you make of that?
Well, again, you know, I look at markets longer term. I don't look at markets day to day. And again, out of respect to the Fed, I'm not going to make any comments on short-term interest rates.
Fair enough. When young people come up to you, sir, and look at these markets and get excited about what they're calling the Trump rally, and they say, you know, Secretary, I want to get into this market. I want to buy into this at these levels. What would you tell them?
Well, on this issue, I'd agree with Warren Buffett. And, you know, Buffett says, look, you should invest for the long term. Again, you know, if you're investing for 5, 10, 20 years, I think there's no better investment than the U.S. stock market. And, you know, what I think you've seen is people, this is one of the things we need to make sure that in the Treasury we can work with other areas on making sure that people are educated about long-term investment opportunities, how to protect their savings, how to invest their savings comfortably. And this is a big issue, but I think you've seen over a long-term period of time, there's no better place for people to invest than the U.S. economy and in U.S. stocks.
Finally, sir, there's been a great deal of attention paid to your wealth coming into this job. You're one of the richest Treasury Secretaries this country has ever had, and that's a pretty elite group. But it's also a group that includes a number of Goldman Sachs representatives, yourself included. I was noticing walking down the hall, there's a picture of Hank Paulson and Bob Rubin, who had your job. Do you feel, given that background, and when especially you hear the likes of Elizabeth Warren criticize the role of the bankers and Goldman Sachs types in this administration, to be extra careful about that association? How do you feel about that?
Well, let me first say there's no greater honor for me than being in this job. Being the 77th Treasury Secretary, in my office, I have a picture of Alexander Hamilton. He looks down on me every day, as he has on the other Treasury Secretaries. There's an incredible history in this building, and when you walk down the halls and you see the portraits of all these people, you realize the history of the United States, and you realize that the Treasury has such an important function, many of which is non-political, many of which is operating the U.S. government and focusing on the economy and focusing on growth and opportunities. And I'm honored to follow a great tradition, not of only Goldman Sachs people. I worked very closely with Secretary Paulson. It's an honor to follow him and Bob Rubin, but other incredible individuals who have served in this role. And I've been a regional banker for the last 9 years, and I think that experience in being a regional banker and having met with hundreds and hundreds of businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, and understanding what they need to drive their business in this economy, and having traveled the last year with the president throughout this country, I've heard from the American public, and that's what I'm committed to doing in this job and working with the president to grow this economy.
Secretary Steven Mnuchin, thank you very, very much. Very good
Thank you.